Good morning. And welcome to the UU Church of the South Hills, also known as Sunnyhill. We're so delighted that you could join us for this service. Our mission here at Sunnyhill is to create a more just and compassionate community within and beyond our walls. My name is Krista Stanley, and I serve as a worship associate for this congregation. If you're a newcomer or a visitor to our congregation, please go to sunnyhill.org and click on the button that says New to Sunnyhill to receive more information about our congregation and to receive our weekly email newsletter. If you're joining us online today, please say hello or good morning in the comments on Facebook or YouTube. We'd like to hear from you and extend a warm welcome to you as well. For all those who are here in person, a gentle reminder to please silence your cell phones and other electronic devices so that we can enjoy this service uninterrupted by buzzing or ringing. If you have a restless infant or toddler with you today and need a place to take a break outside the sanctuary, we have an infant care room back in the corner that you can access from the hallway, where you can still see and hear the service. Today's service is titled, Why Theology Matters. Although most of us don't spend a great deal of time thinking about theology, understanding the theological underpinnings of social and political movements helps us understand the roots and implications of these movements and the ways in which some are toxic and others are life-giving. Our opening words were written by Maureen Killoran. From the midst of pain and challenge, we are called to praise the world. From a world that appears broken, we are called to praise life's moments of joy and grace. From time that seems to freeze and ongoing exchanges, platitudes, and blame, we are called to reach out to those around us, to connect with those we care about, to try to make amends with those from whom we are estranged. The world is too fragile. There is too much pain. Let us bring our hearts together on this day. Let us praise the world and all its blessing and its pain. Please join me in saying the words for lighting our chalice. May this flame symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage as we seek what is good within and around us.
Good morning. Please rise in body or spirit or both to sing our opening hymn, Gather the Spirit.
Of his Good morning, friends. Our story for all ages today was written by Reverend Chris Weiss, and it's based off a traditional Yoruba tale of Alegba, or Ishu. The Yoruba people live in West Africa and are known for their amazing crafting skills. Once upon a time, there was a village with a road that went straight through the center of town. One day, something strange happened. In Orisha, where God or Spirit walked down the road, and they were beautiful. They wore a long, flowing robe, and on top of their head, there was a wonderful hat. All the people stopped to stare at this Orisha as they walked by, and they kept staring until they disappeared in the distance. Wow, God sure was beautiful, said one man. And what a beautiful white hat they had on. Yes, God was beautiful, said the woman from the other side of the street. But it wasn't a white hat they were wearing. It was a red hat. You're wrong, said the first man. It was definitely a white hat. No, you are wrong, said the second woman. It was definitely a red hat. As the two argued, others joined in the dispute. Soon, the whole village was arguing. All the people on one side of the road were certain that Alegba, the god, was wearing a white hat. All the people on the other side of the road were certain that Alegba was wearing a red hat. People got mad and started screaming at each other. Finally, the people got so angry that they decided to build a wall that went straight down the center of town. From that point on, the people on one side of the wall were enemies, and the people who lived on the other side of the wall, and they never spoke to each other. On one side of the wall, the people built a church where they worshipped an Orisha that wore a white hat. On the other side of the wall, the people built a church where they worshipped an Orisha that wore a red hat. Many years passed, and the people were still enemies. Then one day, that Orisha came walking back through the village. They were smiling and balancing on top of that wall that people had built many years ago. This time, they were wearing no hat at all. All the people ran to the wall and cried, "You must settle our argument." "Yes," said one man. "The people on that side of the street said when you walked through the village many years ago, you were wearing a white hat. But we know better. We know you were wearing a red hat. So tell us, Alegba, what color was your hat?" Alegba looked puzzled for a moment and began to scratch their head and thought. "I think I remember walking through this village many years ago," said Alegba. "And on that day, I believe I was wearing my hat that is white on one side and red on the other." And saying nothing more, Alegba continued walking down the wall until they disappeared off in the distance. It was very quiet for a moment. Suddenly there was a sound of one child laughing. Then another child started laughing, and another. Soon the whole village was roaring with laughter. Everyone was laughing because they realized how foolish they had been. As the sound of laughter grew louder and louder, the wall began to shake and crumble until finally it came tumbling down. For many, many years after that day, the people told the story of God's hat and how laughter had torn down the wall between a divided and foolish people. Thank you, Miss Bethany, for being our Alegba. And at this point, we will sing our children down to our religious education class. It's going to happen in the main room downstairs. We're all together for one last day. Let's sing the children. As you go, may joy surround you. As you go in peace. The one God is with you always. As you go, may joy surround you. As you go in peace.
when we share joys and sorrows submitted by members of the congregation so that we may hold together both what we're celebrating and what we are grieving. After each joy or sorrow that I share, please respond by saying, "We hold you in our hearts." A joy and sorrow from Susan McCarthy. Sue says, in June, my mother Rose was diagnosed with potentially curable lymphoma. At first, the oncologist said they don't give chemotherapy to people in their 90s, but because of her good health and sharp mind, Mom decided to do chemo. As she says to everyone, I still have a lot to do. The joy is that Mom has had a remarkable response to the chemo and is tolerating the side effects. I am grateful for Mom's positive attitude, fighting spirit, and my family's commitment to do all we can to support her through treatment and recovery. To Sue, her mother, and other family members, we hold you in our hearts. The sorrow from Angela Klein. Angela says, my sister Stella finished chemo 2 months ago for lymphoma and is doing great. However, a recent mammogram and biopsy revealed she now has breast cancer. She is having surgery on September 19th and will begin radiation shortly thereafter. Our family is terribly saddened by this news. Sending good thoughts for Stella and our family would be greatly appreciated. To Angela, Stella, and family, we hold you in our hearts. As most of you have heard by now via email and other means, our beloved longtime member Nancy Bellamy died this past week. We have planned a memorial service for Saturday, October 1st at 2:00 p.m. To Nancy's family and close friends as they navigate the grieving process, we hold you in our hearts. Also, several weeks ago, I mentioned during Joys and Sorrows that Cindy Mentzer's brother, Tom Giles, died recently. She is having an open house at her apartment as a celebration of the life of her brother, which will take place this week on September 17th from 1 to 3 in her apartment in Dormont. If you're interested in being with Cindy at that time, I encourage you to get in touch with her directly. In the meantime, to Cindy and her family, we hold you in our hearts. Please join me in the spirit of meditation and prayer. Let us take a moment simply to sense breath coming in and breath going out. When you are struggling, breathe. When you are celebrating, breathe. When you are trying something new, breathe. When you are facing the same old challenges, breathe. When life is good, breathe. When everything comes unglued, breathe. Sitting here right now, surrounded by people who care, breathe. In the silence of this moment, breathe. Breathe in the peace of this place and this moment. Breathe out the love that longs to be unloosed in our world. May we remember and return to this place of openness and breathing throughout all the moments of our lives. Amen. I'm lighting a special candle this morning in remembrance of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, 21 years ago today. For those of us who remember that day, it will be forever etched in our memories, both individually and collectively. We'll remember where we were and what we were doing when we heard the news. We'll remember how the dust that settled on New York that day also seemed to settle on the rest of the country and the rest of the world, falling like a shroud as we mourned the loss of so many lives. We hold in our hearts all those who lost loved ones in 9/11, as well as hundreds of thousands of others who were traumatized by the events of that day and by the subsequent 20 years of war. perhaps ironically, one of the most difficult subjects to preach about is theology itself. You can ask any clergy person from any tradition and they will tell you something similar. Once you start talking about theology, you can see people's eyes glaze over and it makes them a little bit confused and uncomfortable. And for Unitarian Universalists, it's a particular problem as we've generally rejected religious creeds and dogmatic statements of faith. So we cannot rely on formulaic responses to theological questions. As a result, our answers to such questions can sometimes seem quirky and highly individualistic. There's a joke that says, actually it's a whole genre of jokes that says, you might be you, if. This one says, you might be you, if to explain your personal theology, you have to use interpretive dance. As for me, I would love to see theological debate as a dance-off. It would be much more entertaining than some other theological debates that I've witnessed. But theology is important. Whatever your theology might be and in whatever way you express it, it's worth pushing through our confusion and discomfort to examine theological matters because they help us get to the heart of what's going on in our world and in our lives. UU author and theologian Paul Razor writes, the term theology is often associated with arcane and academic or technical concepts that focus on abstract doctrines. But the purpose of theology is really quite simple. If religion is about the large-scale world pictures that orient us in the universe and help give our lives meaning and purpose, then theology is about examining these worldviews and the assumptions that go into them. Razor continues, it is about making our implicit patterns of orientation explicit, lifting them to the surface and examining them intentionally, honestly, and critically. It is about reflecting on these patterns, trying to make sense of them by questioning, clarifying, and re-articulating them. Theology, Razor says, is not only about examining our ideas, but about examining our actions in the world and our justifications for them. That is, theology is, or should be, concerned as much with practice as with belief. So theological exploration can help us better understand our own worldview and assumptions. And it can also help us better understand the worldview and assumptions of others. And it can help us act in ways that are consistent with well-examined worldviews. At this moment in our nation's history, we are seeing on the far right an American theological orientation known as Christian nationalism. It's nothing new. In fact, as stated by author Andrew Whitehead, Christian nationalism was part of our cultural framework since the arrival of the colonists, who located what they were doing in the sacred as part of God's plan. John Winthrop, the 17th century Puritan leader, preached that colonial America would become the city on the hill that Jesus mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount. In order to advance this Christian civilization, violence was required. John Fay, a professor of history at Messiah College, said. Winthrop regularly talked about killing Indians in a providential way. And 200 years later, this language leads directly into manifest destiny. If you examine U.S. history closely, you'll find various versions of Christian nationalism appearing again and again. to justify violent conquest, to justify anti-democratic nativism, to justify the oppression of any groups that are not part of the white Christian patriarchal power structure. The current far-right candidate for governor in Pennsylvania speaks the language of Christian nationalism. His rhetoric makes it clear that he believes that the United States is and ought to be a white Christian, male-dominated nation, and he characterizes anyone who believes otherwise as being aligned with what he calls the forces of darkness that must be eliminated. What we are seeing play out in American politics right now is yet another manifestation of this toxic theology known as Christian nationalism. Understanding the theology enables us to call it what it is, to offer better alternatives, and to act upon our own beliefs and understandings. Toxic theology can be found, of course, not just in the national political arena, but on the individual level too. For example, in the immediate aftermath of immense tragedies like 9/11, or personal tragedies like the loss of a close friend or family member, we naturally start asking why. Why would such a thing happen? Why did this awful thing happen to me or my loved one? We ask similar questions after every tragedy that occurs, after any and all of the mass shootings that we see in this country. Why? After the spate of police shootings of unarmed black citizens, why? After natural disasters such as the recent floods across the U.S. that destroyed the homes of tens of thousands, why? In theological terms, when we ask why such horrific things happen, we are wrestling with the problem of theodicy. That's theo from the Greek theos, meaning God, and disi from the Greek decay, meaning justice. In classic Christian and Jewish theology, it's the issue of reconciling belief in a just and loving God, a God that's all-powerful and all-loving, with the existence of evil in the world, especially evil on the scale of events like 9/11. In order to reconcile these two disparate notions, Christian theologians over the centuries have sometimes resorted to semantic acrobatics and sleight of hand. Some have suggested that it is our own evil nature that is to blame and not God. Original sin, they say, is to blame for all the horrors experienced by humankind. Some have believed that God could intervene to right the wrongs of the world and prevent evil tragedies from occurring, but he chooses not to do so because of the importance of free will and human agency, the idea that we must learn to become more perfect moral actors on our own. But for many of us, especially for religious liberals, the notion of an all-powerful, all-loving God on one hand and the existence of evil, especially evil on such a large scale, on the other hand, seems simply irreconcilable. An all-powerful God who permits or sanctions events like the Holocaust or 9/11 must be either incompetent or unbelievably cruel. The idea of a cruel, punishing God is at the heart of most toxic theologies, whether Christian, Muslim, or of any other religious tradition. And we can't really get off the hook by simply not believing in God. If we have any conception of the good, if we have any idea of human beings as having some sort of core of morality or fundamental values, we still have to wrestle with a very similar question. In Christian theological terms, this difference is expressed by differing views of Christology and anthropology. I'm starting to see the eyes glaze over. I'm going to unpack that. In most conservative religious traditions, there is a high Christology, that is, view of Jesus. Jesus as being wholly divine, and a low anthropology, meaning the view that humans are fundamentally depraved and sinful. Whereas in liberal religious traditions, there is a low Christology, the belief that Jesus was entirely human, and a high anthropology, the notion that people are basically good, though flawed. For religious liberals, theodicy becomes anthropodicy. If people are basically good, then why do they kill and torture each other? How do we justify whatever faith we might have in humanity in the face of evil? It's somewhat different than the traditional question of theodicy, but the focus is still on why. But I think that the question of why, as interesting as it might be, is not the right question to be asking in the wake of tragedy. The question of why keeps us spinning our wheels and wringing our hands. The question of why, the search for ultimate causation, tends to lead us toward despair and inaction, toward being overwhelmed and frozen in our tracks. A more relevant question, a more useful and generative question in the wake of tragedies like 9/11 is, how do we respond? What are we to do? How are we called to act? For me, God, or whatever conception you might have of the good, resides not in the why of the cause of the tragedy, but in the how of our response to it. I don't need to understand why something happened in order to know how to respond. But theology matters. Our ideas about what is of ultimate concern matter. We can either have very narrow theological conceptions which tend to keep us focused on the why of suffering and evil, or we can have broader theological understandings that point to the how of our response to suffering and evil. In recent decades, people keep trying to make religion and theology smaller and smaller, suggesting that there's only one very slender path to salvation, and it involves personal piety and extremely narrow creeds and beliefs. But religion, and our religion in particular, is much bigger than that. I know a number of you in this room were present at the Women's March in Washington, D.C. that took place in January of 2017. My daughter Ella and I went with a busload of other Sunnyhill members and friends, some of whom are among us today. For me, the Women's March provided a great case study in competing theologies. There was an implicit unifying theological message at that march and at many subsequent marches and events. It was articulated in 1,000 different ways, but the message was this: we are united as a movement and a country by our caring for one another, by our commitment to our mutual welfare, by our concern for something called the common good. If the central message of Christian nationalism is an authoritarian, me first, America first outlook on life, then the central message of the Women's March was an egalitarian, all rise together approach. Some will argue that this supportive, caring, compassionate point of view is the equivalent of rainbows and unicorns in a world of hard ideas and harsh reality, but do not believe them. This idea of the common good is firmly embedded in our U.S. Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution, and it's not just some wild, pie-in-the-sky, dreamy dream. And it is embedded in our own UU principles. It is something to fight for. It's something people have died for. It's something that each of us has a responsibility to preserve and protect. One of the moments that I observed at the Women's March that has stuck with me involved a preacher who was there trying to save the souls of many of us alleged heathens. At one point, he was surrounded by a circle of women, and the preacher shouted out, "Tell me this, do y'all believe in Jesus Christ? Do you believe in Jesus Christ or not?" And one of the marchers, without missing a beat, said, "We believe in love." And then it began to be a chant, "We believe in love. We believe in love," and it grew outward from that small circle to larger circles. And that was a religious moment. That was a moment of theological clarity. And there were hundreds of such moments in that march. And by the way, as someone who loves Jesus, I believe with all of my heart that had Jesus been present at the Women's March, he would have been chanting right along with us, "We believe in love," because Jesus was all about love and inclusivity and the common good and being on the side of the oppressed and marginalized. And he was not at all about narrow religious law or narrow religious beliefs or theologies that perpetuate false and harmful ideologies like Christian nationalism. Theology matters. While ours is not a tradition that has focused on narrow religious belief, our theology of justice, equity, and inclusion matters a great deal. As UU Minister John Burens has said, the ideal we seek to embody is of forebears wise enough to put aside the creedal question, what do we all have in common, for more profound covenantal questions, how shall we treat and help one another here? What hopes might we share? What promises shall we make to help deepen one another's lives in the time that we have? As I said, theology doesn't have to be complicated. And I haven't even resorted to interpretive dance yet this morning. I hope and pray that we might be willing to do the sometimes confusing and uncomfortable work of theological reflection, and that in so doing, we will live into the hope and promise of our faith. May it be so. Amen. As the choir is coming up, I'll just say one of the reasons we sing together in church has to do with building and experiencing our collective power. Joining our voices together in song allows us to experience firsthand that truth that the whole of the summer is greater than the sum of its parts. When we bring together our voices, just as when we bring together our other resources and attributes, we create something that could never be created with just one voice alone. In that spirit, I ask you to rise and embody your spirit and join in singing our hymn, Now Let Us Sing, which the choir will lead. And usually we have the lower voices singing that first part, Now Let Us Sing, and the higher voices singing the second part. There's one word that changes in each verse, so just pay attention to that and all will be well.
Now let us sing to the sound of the singing.
We don't have a designated offering this morning, so our collection will benefit Sunnyhill and help defray our operating expenses. If you'd like to make a gift via our online giving system, please visit sunnyhill.org or access our text giving system at 412-324-3130. For those of you who are here with us in person, we'll be passing around our offering baskets in just a moment. Thank you everyone for your generosity. Sunnyhill, and it's so great to have a full house this morning. Makes my heart happy. And I'd just like to take a moment or two to say a few words this morning about what it means to be a member of the church. Our bylaws state that anyone 18 years of age or older can become a member by completing a membership orientation program and signing the official membership book. The bylaws also state that a member in good standing is one who makes and fulfills a pledge, contributes time and talent to the Sunnyhill community, and participates in the activities of the church. So in the narrowest sense, a member is someone who completes our Pathways orientation class, signs our book, makes and fulfills a financial pledge, and participates. But in a broader sense, a member is someone who takes responsibility for the vitality of the church. In other words, membership means investing not just your money in the church, although your financial support is essential, but also investing your time and talent, your unique set of skills and abilities, your love and attention, and your best and most authentic self in order to help the church thrive. Most people start out here as observers, and they later become participants. But the next step is to become fully engaged in the life of the church. And this looks different for different people. For some, it might mean serving as a worship associate and becoming involved in social justice.
For others, it might mean joining a sharing circle and serving as an usher. It might mean serving on the pastoral care team or the facilities crew. There are so many different ways to become fully engaged in Sunnyhill. If you stop by Jen's table after the service, you'll see that she has 41 slots to fill in order to make RE, OWL, Coming of Age, and all of those other important programs for our youth happen. So stop by and see her. How you become engaged is totally up to you, but being engaged in some way is a crucial part of being a member, and we count on our members to step up to the plate in whatever ways they can to contribute to the vitality of the church. We recognize that there are factors that may limit how you can become involved, and that's okay. All we ask is that you do what you can with what you have to help keep Sunnyhill flourishing. Many of our newest members have become deeply involved in church life and are involved in nearly all of the church's teams and committees. We have newer members on the board of trustees, leading sharing circles, singing in the choir, and chairing the caring team. It's great that new members have stepped up in these important ways, but it's also important for our longer-term members to stay engaged. The church is counting on your continued involvement, even if it might look a little bit different than it did when you first joined. As is the case with anything in life, you get out of church what you put into it. The more engaged you are in the life of Sunnyhill, the more you will gain from the experience. And the more engaged you are, the more we can accomplish, building a more just and compassionate community within and beyond our walls. Before I finish, I'd just like to bring up the Seasons of Fun auction parties. We really need people to step up and volunteer to host parties for the next several months. We have 7 submitted so far, and our goal is 20 or more. So please stop and see Nanette at the Seasons of Fun table after the service if you need ideas or someone to partner with. Parties are so important for members, old and new, to have fun, learn, and grow together. This summer, I went to an earring exchange party put on by Judy and Rebecca, and I went to the Liberman's Lake House and had a blast. And it was really thrilling to see older members and newer members alike, and we had a really good time at each of those. Party signups will take place the evening of September 24th here at the church. Stay tuned to the beat for more information about that, but we're planning to do a multi-generational trivia night after party signups. Okay, so I invite you all to stay for our participation fair and fellowship hall in the choir room after today's service to find out how you can become more involved with helping Sunnyhill thrive. Thank you for all you do for one another, for our church, and for the world.
Please join me in saying the words for extinguishing our chalice.
We close with these words: as we depart one from another, let our hearts be secure through every human season. Let our hearts be secure in seasons of anguish as in seasons of joy, in seasons of failure as in seasons of success, in seasons of uncertainty as in seasons of security. Let our hearts be secure in this dual reality. We are worthy recipients of love and support we can never earn. And we are worthy providers of love and support others cannot earn. Let our hearts be secure, for hearts know and understand and will respond if invited in. Go in peace.